We have an amazing session coming up now discussing the defining moments in engineering leadership. And so we have an amazing panel moderated by Heather Rivers, joined by Erica Lockheimer, Tia Caldwell, and Annie Chang. Heather is the CTO of Mode Analytics, leading engineering, product, and design. She's been writing software for 15 years, starting with the graphing calculator and moving all the way to computational linguistics at companies like Yammer to Microsoft. Erica Lockheimer has been at LinkedIn over 8 years, previously as the Senior Director of Engineering, leading the growth engineering team, and is now the head of engineering for LinkedIn Learning. She's also been responsible for LinkedIn's Women in Tech initiative in 2014 and 15. She was voted one of the top 22 women engineers in the world by Business Insider. Woo! Yeah. All right, there we go. We got the energy in the room now. This is awesome. Okay, next up we have Tia Caldwell. She leads the monetization team at Slack, and for the past 14 years has led teams at Netflix and Microsoft, touching everything from Xbox, Office 365, streaming content delivery, you name it. She's a facilitator for InDev Color and co-founder of Color Code, a scholarship fund dedicated to future leaders of color in tech. This has been the most energetic all day. I'm pumped. You're drawing the right crowd here. All right. Last, we have Annie Chang. She's the Vice President of Engineering at Nado, an AI automotive data platform improving the safety of commercial fleets today and autonomous fleets tomorrow. She was the Vice President of Engineering at Yahoo and was responsible for a multi-billion-dollar web search and search advertising. Ooh, awesome. Well, Heather, the show is now yours. Take us off.
Awesome. I love the energy here. This is going to be so much fun. So when I was leading up to this event, when I was getting to know these panelists a little bit, there was this theme in our conversations that kept emerging of defining moments, of these moments that were like key turning points in their lives, in their careers, in organizations that they were a part of. So we decided to focus on that for today's theme and to zoom way in. If we think about this as kind of punctuated equilibrium, to take those punctuation points and just like zoom way in and highlight those today. So we're going to start with career-defining moments. And Tia, could you tell us about a time that you had one of those really key turning points that really had a huge impact on you in your career at Microsoft?
Yes, so I'm going to start by telling this story. I was the first in my family to go to college. I really didn't have a lot of mentors to see, like, what does it mean to be a computer engineer? And so when I got my first job at Microsoft, I was thrilled when I got an internship and they offered me a manual QA job. And I was like, great, I'm making $50K, I'm going to do manual QA. I made it. Except for when I got there on day one, they were like, oh, I hope you know that manual QA is no longer a thing. You have to switch it to SDET if you want to stay at the company. And so that was a daunting exercise by trying to make sure that my skills were aligned. And then what I did was I switched teams. I transferred into being an SDET, and then eventually moving into development to become a manager. And so the story that I want you to take away is that you always have to adapt. Being an engineering manager on the job, you're constantly learning. And even as I had to evolve through different roles to get to where I am now, I wouldn't have done it any other way. So really excited to be here and talk to all of you today.
Erica, your career has had some super defining moments, sometimes death by 1,000 cuts or life by 1,000 cuts, sometimes, big
it's really bad.
Could you tell us about one of those, please?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, there's definitely continues to be moments, some small moments and big moments, but I remember when I was at LinkedIn in my early days, and I had transferred over as a senior manager running the team, and we went through an organizational change. And it was a moment where our boss had left, and so who's going to take over, right? The next thing I know, the next day, is my peer became my boss. Has that happened to any of you before? Yeah. Oh, there you go. Lots of hands. So when that moment happens, it was the very, very first time that it happened to me. And the first thing that came to my mind was, I'm not quite sure how I feel about this. It feels a little awkward. Totally respect the guy. Love the guy. So smart. But then there's another thing that starts crumbling inside where you're like, why not me? Why wasn't it me? And I remember feeling that way and just not sure how I was going to deal with it. And should I stay at LinkedIn? Should I leave at LinkedIn? Maybe they don't value me. You start questioning, this whole war zone goes in your head. And I remember at the time, I was down. I was like completely down. And I decided I'm going to tell him, who's now my new boss, my peer, how I felt. And I have nothing to lose. So I decided to tell him how I felt. And he said, Erica, do you realize how important you are to this team? Like, I need you as my partner in order to lead. And I said, yes, but you're great, but I'm not quite sure how I feel about the situation. And also, why wasn't it me versus you? And I was just honest. He said, because I asked for it. And I said, well, I'm trying to get to the next level. Director, he said, he's like, you should totally be in that position. And I'm like, here's this, awkward moment. And then he also got worried because now he's in this position. Erica's upset. Is she going to leave? So he winds up telling the entire executive team, our CEO, everybody, like, oh, you should talk to Erica. Within 4 hours, I was talking to every person on the executive team. And you know how awkward that is? Because I wasn't in those offices all the time. I kind of got teary-eyed, but they all, at the same time, wanted to invest in me, and that's what I realized what that moment was. And one thing happened, our head of engineering at the time, he said, Erica, have you ever talked to someone? I'm thinking, I've never done counseling before in my life yet. Is there something wrong with me? He said, no. He said, I have an executive coach that I talk to all the time. He's like, I'd love for you to talk to them. And after that moment, I'm still working with them. Fast forward 6 years, getting to the next level, all those other things, being able to define my goals and what I want to do. I think just having a mentor, having executive coaching, all those things, peer groups, all of that, being a little bit vulnerable and authentic about how you're feeling is super, super key. But for a long time, I was afraid to go that route.
So a huge part of our role in engineering leadership is defining things not just about lines of code, but about the whole organization. We play this huge part in figuring out, how an organization should be structurally, technically, culturally, and so I would love to hear some stories about times that you have all defined or maybe redefined something really significant about an organization and kind of the impact you had and the impact it had on you. Tia, could you tell us about such a time perhaps at Netflix?
All right, so have anybody in here heard the phrase people, process, product? I don't know who coined that phrase. All right, there you go, in the back. PPP, all right. So I don't know who coined that phrase, but the story I want to share with you all is so I walked into Netflix. This is my first time working in Silicon Valley, and I worked for the content delivery team, content delivery network team, and as a result of coming in, the team that I was coming into hadn't had a manager for a really long time. And at Netflix, we pride ourselves in saying things like, we're all senior. We don't need any kind of overhead. We're anti-process. We're anti-this because you're a senior engineer and you should be able to know how to function. And so as a result of joining this team, I had to, one, come in and convince engineers that, hey, I'm your manager, and yes, I deserve to be here, and I'm here to help you, and I'm not the enemy. But when I walked in, a lot of people came in and was just like, hey, managers have targets on their back. Did you know that managers are the first to get fired? So good luck. So with all of this in mind, I try to figure out, meeting with everybody one-on-one, understanding some of their motivations, what are they trying to do? Since we had a very flat level structure, it was more around now how do we interface evangelize our work so that partners are aware of this? How do we have the right process set up in place so that you're not just coding at your desk and not talking to anybody else so nobody's aware of what you have going on? So as a result of that exercise and getting a lot of open 360 feedback, I put together a process where we start doing road mapping. It seems pretty basic, but before they never had a roadmap that they could share with partners. So we start going from quarterly, where we first introduce Agile to the team. Let's start talking about our progress rather than you doing everything at your desk, and then putting that process in place to now be able to share that with partners and show that we're executing and hitting those signals that we put in place and our goals. And so that helped transform the way that we operated. But it did take some time to get there, especially with all the adversity coming in, but it ended up being a good thing in the long run.
And Erica, can you tell us about such a time at LinkedIn?
Yeah, I actually, a very similar situation. Rather than going to a new company, I was leading a new team at LinkedIn, now LinkedIn Learning. That was about a year ago. And so the team I was at before, I had built it from the ground up. Going into a new team where you don't have any of the cred, nobody knows you, you didn't hire the talent, okay, now you're leading this team. And then you go in and it's I didn't want to be too judgy, but of course I'm judging my mind. That's broken, that needs to be fixed, right? But you have to pause, and I was I need to seek to understand where the people are at before I make changes. But it took some time to get there, but I realized the best thing, I said, I could approach this in different ways. You hear reorg, people freak out, like, oh, someone's let go and they're not in a happy place. I decided I'm going to be transparent as hell. And I'm going to tell them exactly, like, these are some challenges that I see. Are you with me or not? Maybe there's something I don't see. Help me. I was super, super transparent throughout the whole organizational change, even with people. Like, first start with the organizational structure. Like, this is how I'm going to win as a business. Align the teams into strategies because they weren't focused on strategies. They were just kind of, it didn't seem orderly to me. Live and breathe the strategy and win and execute on it. And then I'll throw people at it. And then once you start throwing people at it, then you start to see where things start to really break down. And then sometimes do you have the right people in the roles? And then having those transparent conversations with that person. Maybe you're not the right fit for this role. LinkedIn's a freaking huge company. We'll find a definite opportunity somewhere else if it's not the right fit. So being transparent in those conversations. I rolled out the organizational change actually just last week. Some people rose, some people were lateral, but everybody was excited. And if anything, everybody asked like, oh my gosh, how did it go? And I said, it was crickets. Like, that's how it should be, right? You should make change where it's not like this catastrophe, if you can, and be super transparent. But they weren't used to that, and I think it worked out pretty well.
I love that aiming for crickets thing so much. That's perfect. And I just want to acknowledge that I am dying to hear from the badass Annie Cheng over there, just as much as all of you are. But she's a busy lady, and so we are going to be very pointed with our use of her time and ask her about some topics coming up. Okay, so a defining moment, what is that? If you look it up, it's an event which typifies or determines all subsequent related occurrences. You may notice a conspicuous lack of mention of a positive outcome. And I think we can all agree that sometimes the negative outcomes or the really challenging moments can teach us the most. So I'd love to talk about those. Tia, can you give us an example of a really challenging moment you faced that helped define your own grit?
Besides the tester and job bait and switch, when you come in, I would say a daunting task for me was actually just getting a job here in Silicon Valley. So I used to be in the Seattle headquarters working for Microsoft, and I had Microsoft on my resume. I was kind of like a lifer, but not really. I was there for 11 years, and so it was super discouraging to hear from your friends who were already in Silicon Valley, like, oh yeah, you're coming in with an enterprise background, one company. Oh yeah, that's not going to be a good look for you. You're going to have a hard time finding a job. And so I went in with all these like preconceived notions of like, oh my God, I need to try and reinvent my resume to make it look a little more snazzy, to highlight something about how I switched different groups every 2 years. So I actually was learning those different skills, but tailoring that to the company that I was interviewing with. So when I came down here, I finally did just finally buckle down and say, okay, I'm gonna interview for the top 5 companies that I'm really passionate about. And when I got in, I walked in and just let everything go, and I ended up getting the job, and I was completely surprised because they didn't want me to walk out without having the offer, and I think it was just like this message where I was letting everybody get the best of me in my head, but it seems like, Silicon Valley, being an engineering manager with great leadership skills is a good skill to have because there's companies here all over the place, the world is our oyster, so to speak. So I think the major thing that I would say is just not being afraid and trying for what you want, knowing what you want in advance.
So Erica, we had actually talked about how not everything is one big defining moment that's just this one make or break meeting or presentation, right? Sometimes change happens through these 1,000 little moments. Can you talk about one of those kind of sets of 1,000 moments that define something big about your grit?
Yeah, I was just sharing a moment. It happened yesterday. And when you talk about that war zone in your head, we have this thing at LinkedIn, QBRs, quarterly business reviews, and the whole executive team is there. We're talking about what our plans are. And there was a moment where, all transparency, we're going through a major migration, Lynda platform to LinkedIn Learning Platform. But we ran into some customer issues where they're like, hey, domain blocking, or, some companies are not okay with, social media. How are we handling that? And it was newer to me, and I'm like, I didn't know we were running into this issue. But my partner in sales, what do you mean engineering costs are really high? And it was this moment where we're supposed to be partners, but it was a bad moment in a meeting like that where we're not aligned, and it just seemed not great. I dissected the hell out of that thing. Where I came home and I just started talking to people. How was it? I'd ask my boss. He's like, no, everything's fine. But in your mind, that little tiny moment, sometimes it doesn't have to be this big moment that happened, but how you show up in a meeting, how you come out of that meeting, how you're partnering in that meeting matters so much. And I dissected it. And sometimes you have to do kind of clean up on aisle 9. I didn't handle it as best. We talked on the phone late at night and like, I could have done this better. You could have done this better. Next time, let's write some emails and make sure everybody knows we're aligned. And that's what we did. We cleaned it all up and everything's good. And nobody thought about it as bad as we did. But when you internalize it and it's happening to you and it's in that meeting, that's what matters. But I do think it's really, really important that those little things add up to how people perceive you. So you have to be, even though it's small, it can actually be big over time when things add up. So I think that's critical to pay attention to. But don't let it get the best of you too, and don't tell everybody about it when it happens.
Yeah, pay attention to those little moments as well as the big ones. So Tia had talked about the challenge of transitioning from a big enterprise to a startup, and Annie actually has been defined, her grit has been defined by an experience like that.
Yeah, so 2 years ago, I moved from VP of Engineering Yahoo, managing about 250 engineers and a revenue generating team, to a Series A startup with about 30 people. And I spent 19 months in that startup. I would say it is very, very tough being any startup leaders here, you know that every day new things can happen to you. So reflecting my experience in the startup, there are victory moments that, and then there are areas that I wish I can do better. Some challenges I now have answer to, but some failures I'm still puzzling on how to turn things around. So on the topic of failure, recently I've been studying like, hey, you know, how do I think about this? So I ran into an author named Brené Brown. So she did a bunch of tech talk on vulnerability. So if you have a chance, can take a look. She stated that vulnerability is the birthplace for innovation, creativity, and change. So my takeaway is that as tech leader in Silicon Valley, if we want to innovate and if we want to explore uncharted territory to change the world, failure is inevitable. So as leaders, how do we handle the vulnerability situation? I've been spending a lot of time thinking about that. So Dr. Brown talked about the courage to be vulnerable is not about winning or losing. It's about the courage to show up when you can't predict or control the outcome. So there's a quote that she always talk about. She often used in her quote in her talk from Theodore Roosevelt. So I'm gonna read the quote to you guys, since we're all about changing the world together. Theodore Roosevelt talked about it is not. He talked about. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doers of deed could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives violently, who errs, who comes short again and again, who at the best knows in the end the trauma of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. So my encouragement to every leaders here in the conference is that if we are the Silicon Valley tech leaders, if we're called to innovate and to bring positive impacts to the world, then we be courageous and show up in the arena, even when we can't predict or control the outcome.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that quote. Speaking of this drive we have to have a positive impact, I think it's kind of counterintuitive that people who have that drive really strongly and are driven to leadership often face the most issues with confidence because the stakes do feel so high and they are so driven. So I'd love for us to talk a little about moments that have defined our own confidence positively and or negatively. Tia, could you tell us about one of those moments?
Yeah, so I'm going to swing it back to Microsoft. So when I came in, joined as a tester, quickly moved to SDET, and then moved to developer. One of the things that I always knew that I wanted to be is like I wanted to get into the management field. And so a great, I would say, achievement for me that I already had put on this pedestal was like, oh, the penultimate team to join at Microsoft is Xbox. Xbox is where it's at. All the cool kids are there. They're innovating. They're doing, you know, exciting things. You have the gaming industry, but the biggest thing that I would do when I wanted to join that was like, okay, well, first I have to get my confidence up to say, do I have the skills to actually do this? And what will I learn as a result? So it made me tailor, instead of just like switching from team to team, to actually see what did I want up front. And as a result of that, I asked myself going in, like, what is it that I want to achieve before joining Xbox, rather than just like getting the fancy name and title and being part of the gaming industry. And so one of the things that I said was like, the skills that I want are, I want to be able to be able to say on my resume in particular, like now I've been able to manage teams that work with hardware. I've been able to manage teams that have a lot of cross-group dependencies. I've been able to do things that I have never actually encountered. And as a result, I ended up joining the Universal Store team because I got the opportunity to work on a universal platform. So I was developing in like our 3D space on HoloLens to like our failed Windows mobile phone device that is there, just to like get the whole scope and bandwidth. So I was really excited to be able to join and then like lead a team there. It was like a crazy death march where we had like 2 summers. That was the one thing I didn't realize if you join like the gaming side of the house, is that you don't have Christmases and Thanksgivings anymore because everything releases during Christmas and Thanksgiving. But it was a great learning experience at the end of the day.
Erica, can you tell us about a time, positively or negatively, something really impacted?
I have tons about myself that are positive or mostly negative, but they're all moments that I'm a lot more confident than I am, obviously, before, and still I have my moments where it goes up and down. It's like this interesting, like, sine curve or something. But anyways, what I also want to focus on is confidence in other people when they don't see it themselves. And I think that that's pretty much our moral obligation. When you kind of get that confidence for yourself, how do you help other people? I'll give you a real example that probably about maybe 4 years ago, I was reorganizing the growth team in a certain way, and I needed to find the best leaders. And I looked around, and I was thinking, you know what? That guy would be great. Actually, and I was like, who's going to lead this team? I need someone that it was an important area that kind of was like me, where I could trust them. And, it's like if I say that, they're kind of thinking like me. And there's this woman on my team. I was like, you know what? She would be great, but she's not ready. And so I figured, I could bet on her or not. And I said, maybe I'll talk to her about it. I talked to her, it was like 6 o'clock at night. We had a whiteboard, and I started talking about how I want to organize the team. And I said, hey, I'm thinking about you maybe doing this. What do you think? She's like, are you sure? I don't think so. I don't know. I don't think that's a good idea. She was like so nervous. She's like, I don't think I can do it. And in that moment, I was like, no, but I think you actually can. And I said, what's great is I know where your strengths are and what your weaknesses are, and we can work together, and I'll be super transparent about when things are going the right direction or wrong direction. I think we can do it. And she said, let me think about it. She came back. She was super excited the next day. I'm going to do it. Fast forward a couple years, she's like one of the top directors here at LinkedIn. But it's like, it's that moment. She didn't even have confidence in herself. So I think when we get there, we have to realize to, raise other people and bet on other people when you're not 100% sure. And they can wind up being some of the best talent that you've ever worked with, because you get to actually mold them into that way of that, where they could be successful. So anyways.
I think that's such an important message for us in this role. Everyone in this room, it's really important, so thank you. Annie, I know this topic of confidence is one that you're really passionate about. Could you tell us about one of those moments?
Sure. So end of last year, I finished a book by Michelle Obama, Becoming. How many of you actually read it? Sorry. Yeah, so sorry if I don't think I'm spoiling the ending, but I think if you start reading it, you will see the consistent thing that she's struggling with is, am I good enough? And it's consistently through different periods in her life. And we look at her, we like, wow, she is so, like, her achievement is like, it spoke for herself. And to me personally, when I read the book, I resonate. And so to me, confidence is no longer about achieving more, getting more like done, but really to battle the inner voices, the stories that I tell myself. And I constantly ask myself, hey, am I good enough? And then, so again, going back to Dr. Brene Brown, she talked about confidence is thinking about that inner voice, writing down, how do you come back, right, that inner voice, is that you write down the shitty first draft of like the story that you make up, and confidence could be one story, but everybody has inner voice, it could be something else, and then you write it down and you say, hey, does that make sense? Do I have data to back up that story I made up about the inner voice that I have? And to me, that method sort of helped me to say, hey, when I maybe exit a meeting, or when I'm not getting certain things that I wanted to have my way, I tell myself some inner story, and that sort of made me motivated. But just write it down, the story that I'm telling myself, and looking at it, and then backing with data and logic, and and then most of the time you'll feel like, oh, okay, the story is not logical. So that helps me.
I did want to just add on, and it was a combination of that, is that I'm a part of this accountability group where we've learned the 15 commitments of conscious leadership. There's a book out there, and they have a great section on fact versus story, so that you can help get these like inner thoughts or imposter syndrome thoughts out of your head, and that actually helps out a lot. So.
Great. So we wanted to leave plenty of time for questions from all of you. So do you all have this app, this fancy app? Please feel free to submit questions there if the top panelists have... Oh, we do have one of those. Fantastic. Okay. If the panelists have said anything that piqued your curiosity, you want to know more about it, we would love to just interact with you. There is... Oh, look at this. There is one question in here so far. Have any of you ever initiated an org restructure? What factors went into the decision of the new structure?
Yeah, so I mentioned this one briefly, but I think the most thing that I think the key thing is if you focus on the business first, like, you know, at the end of the day, we're running a business, right? So focus on what's right for the business, what's right for the team, and then what's right for the individual. If you can hit across all those three, that's perfect. But you always start off with the business, because no one can argue with you, right? If you're just kind of focused around yourself and your team, or I mean, people see through that right away. Focus on the business strategy. So one of the first things that I did is map out what does it take to win this business, and focus out on those strategies. Do you have metrics? Do you have purpose? Can they execute? Do you have someone to, you know, lead it? I think focusing on strategy is the first key that I would do. And then you pressure test it, right? Work with your product peers, work with your biz op folks, like understand what your top tier metrics that you're trying to go for on the business and organize around that. And then the other stuff is the hardest part, which is the people. So, and that's where a lot of conversations happen, and it's almost like therapy in some way, a lot of one-on-ones, because you have to convince people or influence people to believe on, you know, in this new way. And that takes time. And so I think the key thing is once you have your structure, be patient. Don't expect people to switch like that. We are people and human beings at the same time at the end of the day, and we get attached to things. And so change is kind of like, you know, it's the fear of change. So people freak out sometimes.
So we just had actually a really interesting observation from the audience. We're all women on this stage.
No.
Yes. No, it's true. That's a good point. Yeah, that's actually something else that we could for sure talk about. So how do we inspire more female engineering leaders? And thank you for being role models.
That's from me. Thank you so much. This makes my day, just seeing female speakers. This is amazing. And as somebody noted in the beginning, this is great energy. And my question is, how do we inspire more engineering leaders? As somebody who started my engineering career in Ukraine, in Eastern Europe, where there were very few engineers to start with, female, this just makes my day, seeing these successful, badass women. You guys, I hope you give it up to these ladies. Badass. Inspire more engineering leaders to bring more energy in every single engineering room in the Bay Area.
Just real quick, you need to be up on stage.
Yeah.
You just like own the room like in like 10 seconds. So note to self next time.
Yes.
No, you are ready, trust me.
We'll get your name later. Yeah.
Yeah. See you after the session.
Yeah, I'll try that. So as you can see, that I you know, it's actually very new for me to be on stage, and one reason is exactly that question. Is that there is actually a lot of hidden female engineering leaders that I meet in the small groups in somebody's home or some smaller venue. But publicly, it's just not enough female sort of leaders coming out and sort of show as role model to folks. And some people speculate it's because, you know, females, maybe sometimes we don't want to boast our accomplishments. And then that's what's stopping me personally before. And I just thought, I just want to be low key, I want to contribute, and that's it. But I have a young daughter, and she's turning 7 now. And I look at her, and I just see, hey, I want to do it for her. I want to be that role model. I want her to growing up seeing, while they are indeed female in the leadership role, and they kick ass and they do really good jobs. So I certainly say, hey, just starting all the change starting with ourselves. And I encourage all of you, whether it's yourself or you have a daughter, you have a wife, or if you have a spouse, encourage the people around you, the female leaders around you, to just step up and be vulnerable, like I am here now.
I would say it's just really important to give back. Erica had touched on this a bit about raising, helping out the future leaders of tomorrow. I think it's really important to get involved in like high school, getting people involved at an early age, because I even recall when I had told a story in my elementary class. They asked me what I wanted to be when I was growing up, and I said a computer scientist, and they were like, oh no, you mean a teacher. And so there's this like stigma that starts from an early age. I think encouraging other people while they're young to get them intrigued about the field is like very critical and key. And so volunteering with local initiatives around, we have a lot of mentoring women programs at Slack as well, like ERG groups, making sure that you have that set up at your company and make sure that people can be psychologically safe. Is another great way to make sure, like, the badassness keeps spreading.
And I'll just add on to the badassness. Is that a word?
I don't know.
But I just agree with you. I completely agree with you. I think there's this pay it forward model that we have to have. Like, once you understand, like, oh, I've been there, you've been there, it's a moral obligation to be authentic. I started, volunteering with San Jose State. That's where I went to school. I was the first person in my family to graduate too. Nobody told me how to do it. It took me 7 years. I was working the whole time. But I started giving back because I realized all these students were in the same situation. They were going from junior college and here in this path. And I just started volunteering my time. And, not to toot my own freaking horn, but like 6 months ago, they asked, can you do the commencement speech for the graduating class of engineering in front of thousands and thousands of people? Awesome. I said yes. But I mean, I would never realize, and I was scared out of my mind when, okay, I made some mistakes, whatever, it's fine. but the point is like, you never realize what those outcomes will be. And when you start to pay it forward and you start helping other people, you don't realize how much you're going to get out of it and how much growth you are going to have. So again, back to you, kudos to you. You should be here next year.
Yes.
Well, I've been completely floored by the chance to meet and talk to these amazing women, and I'm just really grateful for all of you for taking the time today, and grateful for all of you for being here too. So thank you.
Thank you, Heather.